February 23, 1943. Berlin. The city shook with the dull percussion of distant artillery practice, each report echoing faintly through the bomb-scarred walls of the Telefunken laboratories. A gray dawn leaked through cracks in the blackout curtains, revealing instruments scattered across metal tables. Oscilloscopes, vacuum tubes, coils of copper wire that smelled faintly of ozone. At the center of the room, Oberstleutnant Hans Rung stood motionless over a small wooden crate marked Captured Equipment. Rotterdam, February 2nd. Inside, wrapped in burnt cloth, lay a block of copper the size of his palm. He adjusted his magnifying lens and whispered almost to himself, "This cannot be real." The device looked simple. 8 small cavities bored into a cylinder, a cathode suspended through its heart, but the readings from his test bench made no sense. It produced microwave frequencies no German transmitter could reach, power levels that should have melted its own walls. For weeks, Rung had blamed miscalibration. Now, staring at the numbers, he felt something colder: fear. Outside his window, the chimneys of Charlottenburg still smoldered from the previous night's air raid. Allied bombers had struck again, fewer planes, yet greater accuracy than anyone in the Luftwaffe command believed possible. The official reports spoke of improved navigation. Rung now suspected the truth was far more dangerous. He set the copper cylinder carefully on the table and reached for a notepad. No German generator or oscillator can achieve comparable energy concentration at such dimensions, he wrote. If operational, this mechanism represents a decisive leap in centimetric wave production. He underlined the last phrase twice. Moments later, footsteps echoed down the corridor. A messenger entered, saluted, and handed him a folded memo sealed with the eagle stamp of the Luftwaffe's Signals Directorate. The order was simple: deliver preliminary findings to General Martini personally. Rung swallowed hard. He knew what that meant. Martini, the architect of every German radar network from Norway to the Mediterranean, was not summoned for curiosities. Something larger was happening. 2 floors below, in a windowless operations room, a map of the North Atlantic covered an entire wall. Thin red strings traced convoy routes. Small black pins marked the last known positions of lost U-boats. Every morning, aides replaced pins with new ones. Every morning, the pattern worsened. In January, 13 boats lost. In February, 17. By early March, the figure would double again. Admiral Karl Donitz's headquarters at Carnival transmitted new orders almost daily. Change patrol zones, alter surfacing times, adjust radio discipline. Nothing helped. Reports from surviving commanders described an enemy that saw in darkness. Aircraft descended from cloud cover with surgical precision. Convoys turned away from approaching U-boats before the Germans could even sight them. The Metox detectors, once their lifeline, remained silent until bombs exploded. Donitz's staff plotted each loss on transparent sheets. When they stacked the maps together, a pattern emerged: the Bay of Biscay, the approaches to Iceland, the Mid-Atlantic Gap, all death zones now. No human eyesight could have done this. Something invisible was guiding the Allies. 3 weeks earlier, on a frozen night along the Dutch coast, villagers had watched a burning shape tumble from the clouds. The British Stirling bomber hit marshland near Maassluis and disintegrated. By dawn, German troops ringed the site. To the locals, it seemed routine. To Luftwaffe intelligence, it was anything but. Among the wreckage, technicians found a half-melted transmitter assembly labeled H2S. They recognized none of its components. It used no familiar frequency bands, no standard valve types. Orders came instantly: pack everything, ship to Berlin. By the time the crates reached Rung's laboratory, rumors were already circulating through Telefunken's corridors, whispers of a new Allied device that could see through clouds. Most dismissed it as fantasy. After all, German research into centimetric waves had been shelved as impractical months earlier. Now, the fantasy sat on Rung's table, humming faintly under test current. When General Wolfgang Martini entered the lab later that day, the room fell silent. Tall, thin, impeccably dressed, he carried the unshakable calm of a man who understood the value of secrets. Without a word, he examined the copper cylinder, then motioned to the test apparatus. "Show me." Rung switched on the power supply. The oscilloscope trace leapt, steady and clean. A bright spike appeared at 10-centimeter wavelength. Martini leaned closer, expression unreadable. "How much power?" "Several kilowatts, Herr General." Sustained, Martini exhaled slowly. "Impossible," he murmured, then corrected himself. "Until now." For years, his engineers had tried to reach such frequencies. Every prototype burned out before yielding usable output. The British somehow had succeeded, and miniaturized the result into a device light enough for aircraft installation. He turned toward Rung. "Do you understand what this means?" Rung nodded. "Yes, sir. They can detect anything, ships, coastlines, even submarines, through fog or darkness." Martini looked down at the copper block again. "And we have no defense." The revelation spread quietly through Germany's scientific circles, each link in the radar chain learning only fragments of the truth. At Peenemünde, physicists recalculated the limits of existing transmitters. At Lorient and Saint-Nazaire, U-boat commanders received new orders: avoid surfacing near enemy aircraft routes, maintain radio silence even at risk of losing contact. But it was already too late. The Allies' microwave radar, guided by magnetrons like the one on Rung's table, rendered the Atlantic transparent. Aircraft no longer relied on spotlights or search patterns. They homed directly on faint echoes from submarine conning towers. In 1 month alone, May 1943, 41 German submarines were sunk. It was, as historians would later call it, Black May. Rung remained in the lab long after Martini departed. He switched off the power, the trace on the scope fading to a single point of light. Outside, sirens wailed again, another raid alert. He thought of the men aboard those U-boats, crews he had never met, dying in darkness hundreds of kilometers away, hunted by invisible beams. Technology had become the battlefield, and Germany was losing. He opened his notebook to a clean page and wrote a final line before the lights flickered out. "We are no longer ahead. The enemy sees what we cannot." The following morning, the corridors of the Telefunken Institute filled with the clipped rhythm of boots and the faint whine of generators starting up. General Martini had not slept. He had spent the night at his desk in the Air Ministry, cross-referencing technical notes, order of battle reports, and the mounting graphs of U-boat losses that lay spread across his table like an autopsy. By dawn, he summoned a closed conference of Germany's best radio physicists. The men arrived pale and exhausted, summoned from various research posts, Siemens, Lorenz, Gema, each clutching folders stamped Geheime Kommandosache. On the chalkboard, Martini drew a simple diagram: a copper block, concentric rings, a magnetic field, an arrow marked 10 centimeters. "This," he said, pointing with the chalk, "is what was found in the British bomber near Rotterdam. It is called a cavity magnetron. We will reproduce it, understand it, and destroy the advantage it gives our enemy." The room remained silent. No one wanted to be the first to admit that the diagram represented something far beyond current German capability. Professor Erich Fison, a leading engineer from Lorenz, finally spoke. Herr General, our transmitter tubes melt at half that frequency. Even with forced cooling, we cannot achieve sustained oscillation. Martini turned. Then we will not melt them. We will learn why theirs does not. He ordered a complete dissection of the captured unit. Teams worked through the night, measuring the dimensions of every cavity, testing alloys, photographing the internal structure. They discovered that the British had used extremely pure copper, machined to tolerances measured in microns, impossible to duplicate with Germany's current wartime tooling. The design looked almost handcrafted. When the metallurgical report reached him, Martini felt a cold admiration. The enemy's device was simple but perfect, nothing wasted, nothing decorative. It was as if the British had stripped radar down to its essence: power, frequency, and endurance. 3 days later, Martini boarded a night train to Paris to brief Admiral Karl Dönitz in person. The U-boat commander's staff had been demanding answers, and the Admiral's patience was wearing thin. The meeting took place inside a dim, wood-paneled operations room beneath a French chateau, now serving as Kriegsmarine headquarters. Maps covered the walls. Every red pin was a loss. Dönitz greeted Martini stiffly. "General, my men die faster than they can be trained. I need solutions, not theories." Martini laid the copper magnetron on the table. Its surface caught the lamplight like a piece of sculpture. "This," he said quietly, "is your enemy." He explained what they had learned, how the device produced centimetric waves, how those waves ignored the limitations of the old Metox detectors, how Allied aircraft could now find U-boats even on moonless nights. Dönitz listened without interrupting, fingers tapping the table in slow rhythm. When Martini finished, the Admiral asked only one question. "Can we stop it?" "Not yet," Martini replied, "but we can listen for it." By spring 1943, every operational U-boat carried the Metox radar receiver, an ungainly box with a wireframe cross mounted above the bridge. It had once provided a few minutes' warning before Allied aircraft appeared. Now, it offered nothing but false confidence. Martini proposed a replacement, codenamed Naxos, sensitive to shorter wavelengths. But production delays, shortages of high-frequency valves, and bureaucratic rivalries slowed its deployment. In the meantime, Dönitz's men continued to die. Each radio report that reached Berlin carried the same story. No warning. Aircraft overhead without detection. Metox silent. By May, Dönitz finally accepted what Martini had already concluded. The battle was being lost not at sea, but in laboratories. Inside Germany, the race to counter the magnetron consumed every available research facility. Gamma engineers in Berlin-Adlershof attempted to copy the British design, but the materials were scarce. High-vacuum pumps failed. Magnetic fields were uneven. Each test ended in failure or explosion. Still, fragments of progress appeared. A prototype known as Fuji 240 Berlin emerged, a centimetric radar adapted from the captured H-2S. When tested on a night fighter in late 1943, it worked astonishingly well. For the first time in months, German scientists felt a flicker of parity. But the flicker came too late. By then, Allied technology had already advanced to the next generation. Radar small enough to fit in a torpedo bomber's nose, accurate enough to pick out a submarine periscope from miles away. The Atlantic, once vast and secret, had become a sheet of glass. Summer 1943. Berlin burned nightly. Martini and Rung met again amid the rubble outside the Telefunken building after yet another raid. The laboratory roof was gone. Instruments lay twisted among the bricks. They sat on a broken step, sharing a cigarette in silence. Rung finally spoke. "We can copy their machine, General, but it will take months we do not have." Martini nodded. We are fighting time itself." He gazed toward the distant glow of fires. "Once, we believed supremacy lay in courage, in steel, in numbers. But the war has turned invisible. It moves in wavelengths, faster than ships, beyond human senses. Whoever masters those waves controls the battlefield." A gust of wind scattered ash across the pavement. Somewhere above them, Allied bombers droned homeward through the clouds, the very clouds their radar now pierced with ease. That autumn, German listening stations on the French coast intercepted curious signals, short bursts of microwave energy far above normal frequencies. Martini ordered triangulation. The source was traced to a convoy north of the Azores, where Allied ships seemed to maintain perfect formation even in fog. It was proof that the Magnetron's secret had migrated from bombers to escort vessels. Every advantage Germany had once enjoyed under the ocean was evaporating on the surface of the airwaves. In October, Dönitz read the latest casualty report. 56 U-boats destroyed in 8 weeks. He stared at the figures for a long time before writing a single word in the margin. Unhaltbar. Untenable. Martini returned to the Air Ministry one last time that year. On his desk lay a small wooden box, the disassembled parts of the original British Magnetron. He placed each piece carefully into its velvet slots, closed the lid, and locked it. In his final report to Göring, he wrote, "The enemy's superiority in centimetric radar is decisive. Unless a countermeasure of equivalent principle is realized, our forces at sea and in the air will remain blind." No one in authority wanted to hear it. By then, the Reich was already fighting on too many fronts to admit defeat on the invisible one. Martini sealed the box and turned off the light. Somewhere deep in the ruins of Berlin, the hum of Allied bombers grew louder again. Winter, 1943, bled into 1944, with the Atlantic still claiming its victims, though fewer now wore Allied uniforms. The hunters had become the hunted. In the gray dawn of January, U-boat U-406 surfaced west of Ireland to charge its batteries. The sea was calm, visibility near zero. The commander, Kapitän Leutnant Horst Frey, stood on the conning tower scanning the horizon. The Metox receiver hummed softly, lifeless. Then, from nowhere, the night erupted in light, flares cascading through fog, the scream of engines, the hammer of depth charges. Within minutes, U-406 vanished beneath the waves. No distress signal, no survivors. The attack had been guided entirely by centimetric radar, the same principle born from that copper block Martini once held in his hands. To the men below the waves, it was as though the enemy could see through darkness itself. In Dönitz's underground command post, rows of clerks updated a map of the Atlantic every morning. The board once bristled with small white flags marking operational boats. By the spring of 1944, half had been replaced by black crosses. The Admiral said little, but those who served near him remembered the silence that followed each update. Between March and June, 132 submarines failed to return. Allied losses dropped to their lowest since 1939. Convoys now reached Britain in record time, their decks loaded with tanks, aircraft, and men preparing for the invasion of Europe. Radar, invisible, tireless, merciless, had secured the lifeline of the free world. In desperation, German engineers introduced the Schnorchel, a breathing tube that allowed U-boats to run submerged for long stretches. They painted hulls with special radar-absorbing coatings, tested false echoes, even floated decoy buoys to confuse Allied operators. None of it worked for long. The Allies countered every adaptation with new frequencies, new signal processors, and increasingly, with computers that could analyze echoes faster than any human. The war of machines was accelerating beyond the pace of human invention. At Peenemünde, The same laboratories that built V-2 rockets were ordered to explore microwave counterweapons. But in the ruins and shortages of 1944, even the brightest minds could not conjure copper, precision tools, or time. Germany had entered the radar war too late. For the crews at sea, technical reports meant little. They lived in steel coffins, listening for sounds of death. U-boat veteran Carl Hoffman later wrote, "We no longer surfaced to fight. We surfaced to die. Depth charge patterns became the rhythm of their nights. Many never knew how they had been found, only that the enemy always arrived unerringly, as if summoned by fate. Those who survived spoke of the sense of being watched from the sky, of a presence above the clouds that saw everything. That presence was radar. By late 1944, Martini had been reassigned to other duties. His work on counter-radar had become a historical footnote, overshadowed by the Reich's collapse. Yet, in his private notebooks, found after the war, he continued to analyze captured Allied equipment. One entry, dated December 19th, reads, "The magnetron remains the decisive step. It condensed an entire chain of theory, Maxwell, Hertz, Barkhausen, into a weapon. Those who mastered it mastered perception itself." He seemed to grasp something profound, that radar had not merely changed tactics, it had changed the nature of war. Battles were now won or lost by those who could see first, not shoot first. As 1945 dawned, Allied fleets ringed Europe. Their radar screens glowed like constellations. Night fighters prowled the skies, guided by the same microwave pulses, first tested in secrecy back in Britain. When Allied troops landed at Normandy the previous June, every ship, every bomber, every landing craft carried radar. It guided them through fog and smoke. It tracked the German shore batteries. It turned chaos into coordination. The once mighty Atlantic Wall, designed to repel invasion, had been pierced by invisible eyes. On May 4, 1945, Admiral Dönitz, now briefly head of the collapsing German state, ordered all U-boats to cease hostilities. In Kiel, Wilhelmshaven, and Trondheim, crews scuttled their vessels rather than surrender them. As the boats sank, the radio frequencies they had once haunted fell silent. In the cold stillness that followed, Allied scientists walked through abandoned bases and recovered what was left of German research. Among the crates, they found prototypes of the Berlin radar set, crude but unmistakably inspired by the British Magnetron. On one workbench lay a note in Martini's handwriting. "Too late, but not in vain." After the war, captured German and Allied scientists sometimes met again, this time in conferences, not battlefields. They spoke of waveguides, of frequency bands, of the eerie beauty of oscilloscopes. Many realized that their wartime work had laid the foundation for peacetime technology. Air traffic control, weather forecasting, even the microwaves that would one day warm food in every household. But the cost had been immense. In the Atlantic alone, over 30,000 German submariners had died, a casualty rate of more than 70%. Few campaigns in modern history matched such loss for so little result. For the men who had once sailed beneath the waves, the lesson was bitter. No courage could overcome blindness. The magnetron had given the Allies sight in darkness, and with it, control of the seas. Years later, in a British museum, a small copper block sits inside a glass case. Its surface is dull now, its once brilliant cavities filled with dust. The label reads simply, "Cavity Magnetron, recovered 1942." Few who pass it understand that this unremarkable object ended one of the most decisive battles of the 20th century. For when German admirals finally examined a captured radar set and understood what it could do, they realized too late why their submarines were vanishing. The war had turned invisible, and in that invisible world, Germany had already lost.